Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm watching the numbers of participants gradually increase at the bottom, so I'm just going to stall for a couple of minutes whilst we let everybody join in. I've seen a good number when it stops going up too much. Okay, I'm going to kick off because it looks like it's settled down. Hello, everyone. My name is Cllr Rebecca Smith, and as chair of the new Commission on Violence Against Women and Girls in Plymouth, I am your host or your chair for this evening's meeting. I am a city councillor on Plymouth City Council representing a ward in Plymstock, although obviously I'm not here with that specific hat on this evening, but just in case you've seen my name anywhere. And I've got a bit of a policy background as well, so I thought I wanted you to understand that I'm not coming at this having never worked on anything like this before. I've been involved in developing policy and actions and recommendations, specifically on justice policy, actually. So there is an echo of what we're doing here this evening and what we're going to be doing over the next few months. The purpose of this evening's event is to hear from both our panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment, but also from you as well. So there will be plenty of time for questions and answers over the course of the evening. I know a lot of you have submitted questions already, so we will touch on some of those, but also I'm keen that we make as much opportunity as possible for you to feed things in off the back, particularly of what our panelists have said this evening. So that leads me nicely on to introducing our panelists. And unfortunately, the first one I was going to mention is the one that's not actually pictured on the screen, but instead is represented by a very nice picture of a telephone. Clearly, Matt Longman doesn't look like a telephone. He looks like a very nice gentleman. But anyway, he is getting had some issues getting on this evening. So we've had to resort to using the good old phone as a dial-in. But Matt is here, and he is the Chief Superintendent and Plymouth Commander. He's also of the police in Plymouth, and he's also the chair of the Community Safety Partnership and Safer Plymouth. So that is why he's on this call this evening, and we'll be hearing from him shortly. But welcome, Matt. The second person to mention is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Devon and Cornwall, Alison Hernandez, who is going to be sharing a bit about her work specifically and what she's doing on all the things that we're talking about this evening. Matt Garrett is here on behalf of Plymouth City Council. He is the Service Director for Community Connections, and I know he'll unpack what that means for us and how that relates to the topics that we're covering this evening as we head into the conversation. And then I'm also delighted to welcome Hannah Shead, who is the Chief Executive of Trevi, and Lynn Gooding, who is the Chief Executive of First Light, and they are the joint chairs of the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Local Partnership Board of the Community Safety Partnership in the city, and also are both members of Safer Plymouth. And again, I'm sure they will completely unpack that for us shortly and explain a bit about what that actually means. But you may well be familiar with both of them because they're very much well known and well loved across the city for what they do already. So it's great to have them here. Now I'm just going to read out some rules of the event before I just introduce a little bit more about the Commission. So this meeting is being recorded and will be published on the Council website and social media after the event. If you don't want your actual name to come up or to be included in that, please turn off your camera, and if you like, you can change your profile name so that you can remain anonymous. And if you're new to Zoom, if you just hover over your face, which I'm assuming you can see, I have a different screen to you, I think, you'll see three little dots on the top corner, and if you click on that, it will enable you to rename yourself. That's just so that if you come up in the question and answer, you can ask a question anonymously if you would like. To participate in the event or raise a comment or ask a question, please use the Q&A box that has two little speech brackets in the bottom on your toolbar. Questions will then be published by the event team for everyone to see. It's unlikely we're going to reach every single question this evening, but please be aware that if we don't answer your question directly, we are going to collate all of the questions that were asked both before and after the event, before and during the event, sorry, and we will publish answers to those questions. It will take us a few days to bring them all together, but I know our panel are keen to make sure that they get to answer your questions, as am I. And please be kind and respectful in your comments. This means that if comments are any of the following, they will not be published. So if they contain swear words, are disrespectful of the speakers or other participants, discriminatory or offensive, political or likely to cause offence to public taste and decency, we won't actually ask them. However, I'm assuming most of the people on the call are here because they want to share some really sensible questions and are really keen to find out more about what's going on in the city and how we can all work together. So hopefully we won't have to ignore any of the questions, or at least not ask them. But if you could just adhere to those rules, that would be great. And importantly, please be mindful not to reveal any personal data about yourself or other people. If you have concerns about your own or someone else's well-being, please note that we'll be sharing information at the end of the event about how you can get in touch and raise your concerns confidentially. And in case you wonder how you can make note of a couple of slides in a few minutes at the end, we'll also be emailing all of that information to you so that you have that straight away after the event. Now, in terms of the Violence Against Women and Girls Commission, it was announced a few weeks ago, and this is the first event that we're running, and this was essentially an opportunity straight off the bat for people across the city to ask their questions and to find out what is going on. We've obviously seen some upsetting, distressing and worrying events in the last few months. And that's locally in addition to what's been going on nationally. And I'm sure we all know that a lot of this conversation started more kind of directly for us back in March with the tragic murder of Sarah Everard. And indeed, as a councillor, I was able to ask a question then about CCTV in the city, for example. So it's something that's been on all of our minds in the last few months. And obviously, we've had the tragic deaths in our city since August, particularly the two women of Maxine Davison and Bobby Ann McLeod. And I know it goes without saying that I wish none of us were here this evening to have to discuss this, but we're here, and this is why we want to take things forward. So the commission was set up to enable us to actually look at what we can do across the city to make women and girls feel safer, and also just to create a safer environment for everyone so that we know how we can best enjoy our life living in what is an amazing city. So whether you live here, work here, or just travel through and use the city, we want you to be as safe as possible. And we'll be reviewing what is done across the city to educate men and boys, prevent and deter crimes against women and girls, and consider what support is available for victims. All of those things are really important. We'll be inviting local organisations who work with female victims of violence to hear about their experiences and their recommendations for what more needs to be done. And importantly, we're also keen to hear from local residents like you, which is exactly why this evening's meeting is taking place. And crimes of violence against women and girls include rape and other sexual offences, stalking, domestic abuse, honour-based abuse, revenge porn and upskirting, as well as many others. So all of those things are coming in to the work of the Commission. In terms of how it will work, we're getting very, very close to finalising the membership of that commission. Invitations have been sent out and we'll be able to publish that shortly. We've got some really excellent people on that long list, so I'm sure that the commission as it goes forward will be really well representative and will give us some excellent voices to then hear from the brilliant voices that we've already got across the city working in all of this. And we've given ourselves a pretty short time frame because we recognise how urgent a lot of this is. And so our aim is to be taking evidence, listening and looking at what more we can do, and to be reporting back by the end of March. Now, I know some people might think the end of March, that's a long way away, but actually I think we can all agree that we'll be in March before we know it. And to give this the right amount of focus, we had to give ourselves enough months to do it justice, but equally a short enough time frame to show that we're actually doing things as well. And that panel will be meeting virtually. Unfortunately, with COVID, that means we don't actually probably get to meet each other, but that also means we're able to bring some national voices into the conversation as well as just local ones. And this evening's event is a key part of that evidence taking. The questions that come up, the answers that are given, the themes that come up are really going to steer the work that we do. And it might well be that something comes up this evening that, you know, hasn't crossed my mind yet, but as a result of tonight's meeting and event will give us a steer. But what is really clear, just from the questions you've sent in already, is that there are some clear themes here that we know we need to be tackling. So ultimately, events like this just add to that list and enable us to be as comprehensive as we possibly can in the work that we are doing. So just to say, like I said at the beginning, there will be a slide at the end about keeping safe and how to feed things in. So if anything of tonight is distressing and leaves you feeling like you need to speak to somebody, there will be that opportunity. And as I said, we will be emailing that out at the end of the meeting. I note that there's a whole load more people on the call now. I said welcome at the beginning, but I'm going to say welcome again. For those of you who don't know, I'm Cllr Rebecca Smith. I'm the chair of this new Commission on Violence Against Women and Girls, and your participation this evening is really welcome. So thank you very much for being here. Now, what I'm going to do is hand over to each of our speakers to give them a few minutes to introduce themselves and some of the work they're doing already. Please bear in mind, this is never going to be exhaustive. Either they'll forget to mention something that they really wish they needed to mention, or they'll just be summarising everything so that you don't get bored listening. And it means, so if they miss something off, let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they might well be working on it already. But obviously, feel free to ask questions in the comments if anything is missed. Which leaves me, hopefully he is here, to hand over to Chief Superintendent Matt Longman first, to just set out the scene of what's going on in Plymouth and how things look from his perspective. So Matt, if you're ready, you can unmute yourself, and you've got up to 5 minutes if possible. I won't quite cut you off, but I will be keeping an eye on it and warning you if we're getting over 5. So are you ready to go, Matt?
So long as you can hear me, then yes.
We can hear you, so over to you.
Thank you very much. So good evening, everybody. And first of all, I am so sorry. I've exhausted everything within my power to try and get myself on a camera. Not because I think you need to see me, but more I want to see, read the faces that are also on this panel. So firstly, please forgive me. As the introduction said, I'm Matt Longman, so I'm your police commander for Plymouth. And I'd like to start off by just saying it's a real privilege to sit as on this panel today and be involved in some of the work that's been ongoing for a long time, actually, but I think can benefit so much more from this commission. I say it's an important bit of work because I think it's just a conversation that can now go into a new phase, and the start of that has to be what we're doing tonight, which is to listen to as many voices as possible from across the whole city and start to draw together what more we think we can progress. The role I have is also a privilege to sit in, and it, of course, comes with some challenges. I think that's what this commission should feel like to many of us, and certainly to me. So they're not always going to be easy conversations, but they're honest conversations we can have in the city because of the level of concern we understand is out there, but also an opportunity, I think, to tell us people what we're already doing and what we think we can do in the future. So the next couple of minutes that I've got left is not obviously a huge amount of time. There's an urge in my head that I want to tell everybody a load of work that is going on, and it's difficult to summarise, but I will try and do it. And first of all, I'll say I don't think tonight is about me trying to hit anybody with a load of figures to justify what is or isn't being done. I don't think that's the point of tonight. To give you an idea, when I look at performance and how crime is performing in the city, I tend to look not so much as the rest of the force, but cities that are of similar size and makeup to us. And I would set a context just before the conversation starts too much that compared to many other cities, Plymouth is a safe place, and we're very proud of that, but that doesn't mean that there's lots more we can do. There are some areas that concern me, and there are some areas that in the last 6 months to 6 to 12 months, we've made some concerns in. So generally, I ask 3 things of my staff. One is that if at all possible, we can stop anybody being a victim of crime. Of course, that's not always possible. So where it isn't, that we get good outcomes, that the right people go to court and we get just outcomes or diversion schemes for offences that have happened. But there's another really, really important element, and that's that if we did all that, but people still feel unsafe in the city, then I would still be failing in my job, I think. So those are the 3 things I look at. Trying to reduce crime, where it happens, get better outcomes, and to have a police force that people are confident in. And all 3 of those in the last 3 months are going in the right direction. There are some other areas that concern me, and one of them particularly is violence without injury is starting to creep up in the city, and also sexual offending and rape has also crept up. And I say that only to be transparent with you about the things we need to work on. So I have areas of work in place that are sowing the shoots that I think that's going in the right direction, but clearly this commission and the ongoing conversations and work around it are going to help me steer on those other areas of concern. Councillor, I'm conscious of your time. There are a couple of areas of work I could tell people to give them a flavour of how we're going about that, or perhaps you'd like that to come out in the conversations that follow.
I think let's leave it to the conversation, but if there's anything at the end that you're keen to add in, I'll make a point to leave room for all the panel to provide a final comment if necessary, because I think then that gives us both options. Is that all right?
Sounds great. Then I shall sit back and wait for my steer.
Fabulous, thank you so much. The next, I'm going to welcome Lynn and Hannah. So Lynn Gooding and Hannah Shead are going to just tell us a little bit about the domestic abuse work that they do in partnership across the city, if that's okay, ladies.
Good evening, everyone. So on behalf of Hannah and myself, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Lynn Gooding. I am the Chief Exec of First Light, and we're a domestic abuse and sexual violence service that operates across Devon and Cornwall, Isles of Scilly and Swindon and Wiltshire. We support people affected by domestic abuse and sexual violence, and Hannah does a great deal of work within the city supporting women affected by the same issues. We together chair the local Domestic Abuse Sexual Violence Partnership Board. We were well established before the Domestic Abuse Act received its royal assent this year, and I'm pleased to say we've got really good membership within our partnership board from across the city. And just to give you a flavour of the sorts of organisations that sit on the partnership board, we've got excellent representation from the police, public health, NHS, including the clinical commissioning group, local hospital and a sexual assault referral centre within the city. We've also got representation from both the children's and adult safeguarding partnerships, children's services within the local authority, Department of Work and Pensions, community homes, Plymouth University, and then a range of voluntary sector organisations such as ourselves and Trevi, but also Plymouth Domestic Abuse Service, which is the commission service for the city, the Eddystone Trust, NSPCC, Bernardo's Victim Support and AHIMSA. So together we are we already have a delivery plan as a consequence of a lot of the research that's been done to identify the issues within the city, and together we take responsibility for taking on the work that's included within that plan. And just to give you a flavour of some of the work that we're actually doing, because I know there's real concern about public safety of women and girls within the city, but to give you some reassurance, over the last couple of summers, partners from across Devon and Cornwall have been working with Devon and Cornwall Police. So within the city of Plymouth, there was a domestic abuse safety car which was jointly crewed by police officers and representatives from Plymouth Domestic Abuse Service, and they would respond to domestic abuse incidents as and when they were reported on a Friday and Saturday night. They weren't the initial responders, they were the second responders, and they were able to provide that advocacy support, risk assess, safety planning, and that was really positive in reducing the attrition rate within the criminal justice system. This year there was a slightly different approach to ensure that there was a response across the force area of Devon and Cornwall. And so we provided specialist domestic abuse workers within the police control rooms of Plymouth and Exeter, and they were able to offer support to officers on the ground, but also offer support to people who were reporting incidents as and when they occurred on a Friday and Saturday night through the summer. We've been incredibly fortunate to receive some additional funding both locally and nationally, and that's enabled us to create a new hospital independent domestic abuse advocate, and they're working within the hospital setting, supporting people, whether they are visiting accident emergency, they could be inpatients, or they could well be supporting other staff that are on the premises. It's also really important for us, as well as supporting victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence, that we address the abusive behaviours that is occurring both locally and nationally. So again, we've received some Home Office funding, and that is from the Domestic Abuse Perpetrator Programme, and that's provided funding to another local organisation called AHIMSA, who provides support to people who display those abusive behaviours. Also working with the NSPCC, they have a programme looking at harmful sexual behaviours. Now, talking about domestic abuse, sexual violence, child sexual abuse are all really difficult topics, but unless we're prepared to deal with the abusive behaviours, all we're going to be doing is picking up the pieces and allowing people to go on and continue to perpetrate their harmful behaviour. So there's already work taking place. And we start at a very young age, because we also have a Healthy Relationships in Schools programme. So we're educating young people to understand what is and isn't a healthy relationship. We also have the Bystander programme, and that is training members within the local community to understand what is domestic abuse, but also to be able to challenge in a safe way any abusive behaviour that they witness. And only recently we had the 16 days of action that came to an end last Friday. There was lots of campaign messages. There was also various workshops that we offered to different members of our local community across Plymouth. Whilst we're doing a lot already, we still have a number of areas of concern. And we recognise that domestic abuse has been talked about both locally and nationally as a consequence of COVID, but also we just wonder how long that will stay within the public psyche, and also whether the public understand all the different elements of domestic abuse. The Domestic Abuse Act this year is producing a new definition. And so domestic abuse doesn't just cover physical violence, but it also covers financial control, coercion and control, emotional abuse, all those different elements. And it's really important to understand it's just not intimate partner violence, it's wider than that. And we noticed within a number of the questions that have already been tabled, there is a need to secure the voices of boys and men, to champion the issues that affect violence against women and girls. This isn't a gender issue in so much as, yes, predominantly women and girls are targeted, but this is everybody's responsibility to tackle it. This is a societal issue. So we are looking for our positive male role models to help us tackle this particular problem. And we also know there's real issues with criminal justice outcomes. Only 1.5% of rape and serious sexual assault reports to police receive a positive criminal justice outcome. That is no way good enough, and we want to see that drastically improved. And finally, from me, domestic abuse and sexual violence is a political issue. This is very much a cultural issue. It's been within our generations forever and a day, and we got to start the conversation to make it everybody's business to change it on behalf of all our loved ones, families and friends. So that's a little bit from us.
Thank you so much, Lynn and Hannah. I know you would have been involved in that as well. Great. I'm going to ask Matt Garrett, who is here on behalf of Plymouth City Council, just to let us know a little bit about what the council are doing already to combat violence against women and girls. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, hi, as Rebecca said, I'm Matt Garrett. I'm Service Director for Community Connections, and I'm also Vice Chair of Safer Plymouth. So I will just give you a very, very quick, and I'll be very, very brief. So Plymouth City Council is responsible for coordination of the Safer Plymouth partnership. We also are responsible for commissioning the work of all of the work around violence against women and girls. My team in particular in Community Connections are responsible for kind of operational delivery of antisocial behaviour. We're also responsible for coordination of some of the subgroups in Safer Plymouth. Plymouth City Council is also responsible for some of the wider work around licensing, taxi licensing in the city, and we're also responsible for some of the wider work around kind of parking, highways and street lighting, which also impacts on some of this work. Some of the work we've also been doing is around additional funding that we've been bringing into the city around this piece of work around violence against women and girls. So there's been several bits of money that we'll go on to in answering some of the questions. I don't want to talk about it too much at the moment, but there's been several pots of money that have been brought into the city over the last year and a half that have brought several opportunities to increase the work we've been doing to improve the city, improve the safety around violence against women and girls. So there have been some work around piece of work called Safer Streets that has improved things like CCTV, street lighting, safe places and stuff like that. So, but we'll go into that as we answer some of the questions.
Great, thank you very much, Matt. And lastly, but not least, is Police Crime Commissioner Alison Hernandez. And I know Shead does a lot of work on this whole area of violence against women and girls. So if you want to just introduce yourself a little bit and give us a bit of a flavour of what you're doing, Alison, and I'm sure it will come up as the questions go through as well.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose the first thing to sort of comment is obviously there is a lot of effort going on in this space, and fundamentally it doesn't seem to make women and girls feel any safer. So we know, I think with this commission is an opportunity to think about what is it that we need to do differently. There was a national survey recently in June which actually showed that 78% of women who had not experienced harassment themselves didn't feel safe, particularly in parks and open spaces. And if they had been a victim of previous harassment, that 89% of women who answered that survey said that they didn't feel safe. So something isn't working. And we know it's complicated because we've already heard some of the challenges that some have been highlighted around conviction rate for rape. What Lynn said around the 1.5% of cases being convicted to a positive outcome is shocking. And I think one of the biggest elements of my office that has been, particularly with Plymouth, and Plymouth City Council and my office work together to secure the Sexual Assault Referral Centre to still be based in Plymouth. The NHS, which commissions that service, they commission it regionally. We influence it, but we really influenced it to secure that service in Plymouth. And I don't think enough people know that anyone can self-refer to a sexual assault referral centre, whether it was a historic crime or it happened today. And I think that access to those services to help people, and this commission I think will be really helpful in educating the public around where they can access private support without feeling the need even to go to the police in the first instance. So there are opportunities for women and girls and men and boys to actually access services to help them. So I just wanted to particularly highlight that because I know there's a couple of comments about young women not reporting incidences. What we really do need is that confidence to come forward and report, because fundamentally, whether we like it or not, the police resources and how they are allocated throughout Devon and Cornwall are based on what crimes in particular we may be suffering from and what additional resources the Chief Constable might ask me for to enable that to be improved. So this really does make a big difference, and I just want to flag that. I think I'll just finally add, so we can get to the questions, there is a lot of opportunity still to actually campaign nationally on this issue. One in particular is the online safety bill. There are elements where it's not really pushing hard enough around access to pornography for young people. So I think there's an opportunity maybe that this commission wants to push around some of that. And also at the moment, just to flag, there is the really important role that's been created, which is the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, who is an independent person that's been appointed by the government to really assess and look at what is going on in this space and what needs to be different. And we also have an independent Victims Commissioner appointed by the government who is also looking at this space. There's lots going on. There's also a senior police officer who's been allocated to do the violence against women and girls work nationally. So there are some real opportunities for this commission to identify some things that we might want to see change and utilise a lot of those routes to try and help it, because fundamentally what we are doing now isn't working well enough because we still don't feel safe on our streets or in our homes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to all the panelists for just those little introductions. And as they've all said, a lot of what they're working on will come out, I'm sure, in the context of the questions that we've got. Now, a few of the questions have been specifically asked about the commission itself. So I'm just going to briefly touch on some of those so that then we can get into the questions that I'll bring the panel in on. The first question I got asked was, how will the success of this project be measured? obviously, we want to see the sense of safety increase in our city. I think the success will also be measured in terms of how well we see the recommendations we make delivered in the city. So ultimately, the Commission will be setting out a number of recommendations, and we will be looking to specific stakeholders who already work on the ground in these different areas to deliver some of those recommendations. And we will then have to look and see, you know, hold them to account on that delivery. So I think in terms of the success, that's going to be the way we will be able to measure it in the future. Someone's asked about the diversity of the Commission. Yes, diversity has been a key element of how we have built this, and it's something I've specifically challenged on and ensured that we get as diverse a group as possible. We're slightly constrained by who accepts our invitation, so we've asked a very diverse range of people to join, but obviously we're asking some very busy people to get involved, so we're reliant on who says yes. However, we will also be engaging with a diverse group of organisations and individuals across the city in our evidence taking as well. So please be assured that that is top of my priority list. Equally, we've been asked about how we'll engage with children and young people. Again, that will be something that we work out once we've got our group together, but clearly engaging with children and young people is crucial. Violence in the home often has a massive impact on children and young people in those homes. Another aspect that is coming out in the questions is the education of young people as well. So we will be absolutely engaging with that. And I know that the question has come from a councillor who's particularly involved in that, particularly looked after children as well. So I'm more than happy for her to share any thoughts she has on that with me separately. There's been a question about what additional resources have been provided beyond what was already happening prior. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but basically we've got the resources of the council to deliver this commission, and obviously the commission is going to be making recommendations. It's not up to us at this stage to start delivering things. If the council wants to crack on and deliver things in its own responsibility in the meantime, great, but the commission's work is obviously going to be evidence-based over the next few months. Equally, there's been a question saying, what are we going to be delivering? Well, that's what we're going to be researching and looking into. So I can't comment entirely on what our findings are going to be. However, there's clear themes to what we're likely to be tackling. The first question I am going to go to, though, is about spiking. There's been a couple of questions that have come in here about drink spiking, and the reason why I want to mention this is it actually came up on the licensing committee of the council last week, and I'm hoping that Matt Longman will be able to answer this, and potentially Alison Hernandez, but we asked specifically about that on the licensing committee, of which I am a member, and I was actually quite reassured and surprised by how much is already happening in our city. So I'm going to hand over to Matt on this one, because I know you've got officers who specifically deal with this, but we've clearly seen in the news recently and social media, as was mentioned in some questions, there's been reports of an increase in spiking, particularly drink spiking, but also needle spiking. Is that something that we are seeing in Plymouth? And if not, why is that? Is that because we're already tackling it, or because we've got measures in place to reduce that threat? Matt, are you able to come in on that one?
Yes, of course. I'm just checking you can hear me still okay.
Yes.
Good. Right. Yes, and it's probably, I suspect, a mixture of all those things that you've just said. So if I start off with it's obviously had an awful lot of media attention, both drink spiking and then the addition of needle spiking across the UK. And when you get that in any crime type, what you typically see is a lot of people become alert to it, and then we see more reports. And that can be a good thing in many instances. So there are many areas where we're really trying to encourage people to report hate crime, domestic abuse, etc. And indeed, if people feel it's happening here, we would want to know about it so we can try and understand how much of it is a problem and how much of it is a perception. We'd always believe every case that comes in. We'd always seek to investigate it, and I'll come into some things that we've done there in a minute. But we at the moment, the cases where we have subsequently tested those who feel they've been victims of spiking or needle spiking, have very few cases have we then found on a positive result of any drugs within their system beyond what they realised they'd already consumed. So it's a really difficult one, because absolutely we want to believe all victims of crime do, but there is also a message probably about some people's drinking habits as well that we just need to balance out so people don't have a fear that's not actually real. So the important bit is that we understand when it is or isn't, and this is where I think Plymouth has actually set the bar. We have a licensing team who've worked really hard on this. They've taken money from the proceeds of crime fund and put that back into trying to keep people safe in two key ways. One is to put equipment behind bars. We work very closely with all of the licensing, partly through the license committee, as you say, basically giving them some test kits so they can immediately test a drink. If somebody comes to the bar and they says, I think I've been spiked, there are tools on hand there and then that can help identify what we're actually dealing with. If they find anything, or if indeed somebody reports in a different way, so they ring the police or approach one of my officers in the town, officers also have kit that's a little bit more, that's even better at reading what people may or may not have in their bodies and can start going down an evidential route. So there's kind of like a layered approach to help people understand what we're dealing with on any given evening. And that's been recognised. They've actually got some awards for that. It's been recognised as national practice. So by doing that, we then are able to build a picture saying how much have we got a problem, or how much are people vulnerable for other reasons, perhaps just having had a bit too much to drink, and often puts their own mind at ease when they realise that at that point we don't believe there are any substances that they don't know about in their system. So those are the kind of things we're doing. And then just to finish off, staff given additional training so that they can look after victims and give them that support as much as anything else, as well as the evidential piece, but also working very closely with the licensed premises. Some people may have heard of a scheme called Ask Angela. So if anybody's feeling vulnerable in a licensed premise, they can use that terminology with any member of staff there, and they too are just that bit more switched on than perhaps you would have seen a couple of years ago, to say there's somebody here who needs our support, and they too will contact the police. There's just a flavour there of some of the things that we're doing that I think actually quite groundbreaking and have been recognised as such. That's across the city. That's not just a policing thing. That's a partnership thing.
Great, thanks, Matt. Alison, is there anything where this touches on your role as a Police and Crime Commissioner?
I think just the element at the moment, there is a really good campaign led by a lady called Dawn Dines from SOS Global around drink spiking. So if anybody wants to have a look at that, you can buy stock tops for your drinks, and she's doing really good work in this space. So I suppose one of the things that we try to do is identify community organisations or community businesses that want to actually help in this area. It's a new area over the last probably decade, but there hasn't been innovation that's come through about how to solve it. I would like to add, and I know that this is not possible because I have tried through the licensing committee in the Lords to give evidence about the issue of licensing enforcement around pubs and clubs that serve people who are drunk. It's not supposed to be allowed, but there is a loophole in the law that all the bar person has to say is, I didn't realise they were drunk, and they get away with it. There are fundamental issues about the level of drinking and what you're drinking when you're out, which I don't think helps. And part of that challenge was really identified in COVID, because all of the nightlife was closed down. And we saw a major reduction in some of the crimes that are associated with that alcohol and evening and nighttime economy. So I just wanted to have flag from a licensing perspective is a real issue and a challenge about pubs and clubs serving drunk people and continuing to allow them to drink beyond oblivion in our public spaces. And we know that people are more vulnerable when they're drunk, and issues happen when they're drunk. So I'd just really, that would be my dream, but I don't know how we solve that. So again, if anybody's got any ideas, that would be really helpful.
Great. And just to say, Dawn Dines has been in touch with me actually since I was given the role of being the chair of this commission, and I'm keen that we actually hear what she's doing. So that's a really, really good reference actually. So thank you, Alison.
May I add, Chairman, just to say that Dawn will tell you that most drink spiking is by friends of friends thinking they're being kind and nice by buying triples or doubles for their friends instead of singles, by buying them strong drinks that they don't realise that they're actually drinking. So this isn't just about strangers doing this. This is about friends thinking they're being kind and actually buying heavier drinks for people. So I just thought I'd share that because it's a challenge.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. Well, maybe not all, but I've definitely had drinks bought for me that I hadn't intended on drinking. Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. We've had a lot of questions both before and during this evening about education and about how we work with people in the community, men and women, to ensure that we are educating them well. And I'm keen to bring Hannah and Lynn in on that. Lynn talked in her introduction about the bystander programme, which I was aware of happening, and I know Hannah's work and the work of Trevi works across families, and I'd just be really interesting. I'm going to actually just kind of get your thoughts on that rather than ask direct questions, and hopefully that will answer some of the questions that have been raised. How do we work together? How do we educate? How do we do more? There's been questions particularly from some men attending saying they want to help. What could they do? What are your experiences, and how do you think we can take that forward? And please bear in mind that whole question of education is something that the Commission will be looking at, because obviously there's a lot about culture change in these questions. You know, we can't legislate for culture change, and we can't legislate for people changing their opinions, but what can we do that might have an impact? So if you two between you want to juggle that one around, I'd like to hear from both of you, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall I go first then, Lynn? It's really interesting. I was looking at the questions and seeing how much people are saying we need to bring men into the conversation, and it's really good to see that. As someone who's been in the women's sector for many years, it's felt like a conversation that women have had where we've been sort of talking about it, but it hasn't necessarily been listened. And actually the fact being able to name that we are talking about male violence here, and I appreciate it can make people feel quite uncomfortable when we name it as male violence, but that is what we're talking about. But none of us are living in vacuums. And I suppose one of the things that we talk about in our organisation is how do we have these conversations? We've got to take it beyond just talking to women. We need to talk to the men in our lives. We need to talk to the sons in our lives. One of the things when we're talking about education, which again is a difficult, uncomfortable subject, we're talking about pornography, the rise in violence within pornography, access to online pornography. These are all some really difficult conversations, but we have to start having them. And I think that there's a lot of really innovative work happening in the city, but I think we all have to have a bit of courage here and be brave to actually start to challenge one another and have some of these conversations that do feel really difficult, but are incredibly important if we want to see anything change for our city and for the next generation coming up through.
Great, thank you. Lynn, do you want to add anything in there?
So for me, we need to start at a really young age with this. I've mentioned the fact that there's healthy relationships in schools that takes place. And sometimes that can be really uncomfortable for parents, but we need to start at primary school with really young children so they understand what is and isn't an unhealthy relationship, but also it allows them to identify when something's not quite right at home, and then they can reach out and seek help as well. But unless you educate from a really young age, ideas are already entrenched. You know, families have got they've got a great deal of influence in how they bring up their children. And like Hannah's already said, we've got a duty to have those difficult conversations with our young sons and to educate them, and also to make them grow up and to be respectful of other people, particularly the women. I've got a son who's now 25 years old, and there's been some recent campaigns. I don't know how many people will be aware. Police Scotland launched Not That Guy video. It's really, really powerful. And it talks about those behaviours that are not overtly distressing, but it's that start. You know, it's about, oh yeah, I do that to the mate, and you can overhear that when you walk past if you're a young woman, and that makes a woman feel really uncomfortable. And it's making boys and men recognise that, make them understand that's not acceptable. And I was really concerned about actually sharing that particular video, and I asked my son what he would think about it, and would he see that as blaming all boys and men being responsible for violence against women and girls? And his response was, no, it's not. If a man has got an issue with this, it's because they should look at themselves. Now, I know, I brought my son up. I was a police officer for 30 years, and so it was really important for me. But I would hope the vast majority of parents would look at it in the same way and take that responsibility, because it starts at home, and you've got to educate through schools and into adulthood. Not everybody gets the opportunity to learn in school. And so you need to keep reinforcing that message within communities as well, which is why the bystander programme is so important, because there's lots of adults out there that haven't got the right attitudes and behaviours, and it's incumbent on all of us to be able to go out and educate them as well.
And one of the questions that has been raised to me separately is how we ensure that it isn't all put as pressure on parents, though, because you've got a lot of single parents, a lot of, women raising boys, men raising girls, whatever that might be. And you also don't want to put all the responsibility on the schools, because we also, you hear a lot, don't you, of it's not the school's place to do that. How do you think we do this as a community? Is that, and I appreciate the bystander program is something on that, but and again, this is potentially the $1 million question, but do you have any thoughts in terms of that? And I know there's been some questions specifically about how we work in primary schools, and we will be looking at that. And education obviously does start young, but do you have any specific thoughts on that? And then Matt, Garrett, I have seen your hand, so I'll come to you afterwards.
This needs to be an overt conversation. For far too long, domestic abuse and sexual violence has happened behind closed doors, and people have not wanted to recognise it and not wanted to talk about it. Over the last 18 months, 2 years, people are more, they are talking about domestic abuse more. All the different elements, I'm not quite sure everybody fully understands yet, but you talk about child sexual abuse and it's still one of those really uncomfortable topics. And until people are comfortable talking about it, in open conversation with their friends and their neighbours and their family, it will always be one of those problems that will continue to manifest itself. So having those brave conversations is the start, I think, for me.
Great. I mean, I think just as a Plymouthian, as someone who grew up here and now works here, we actually are amazingly innovative, and wouldn't it be amazing if one of the outcomes of this commission is actually a piece of work that goes into schools that does some of that education? I mean, maybe now I've just said it will happen, but my friend's a teacher, not in Plymouth, but she did a session with some 17-year-old students in an FE college recently, and she sent me the material. It's really straightforward to do it, but you start unpacking what sexual harassment is to young people who have never had anybody tell them that, and we've got to give them the tools to understand where behaviour needs to shift, don't we? So brilliant, thank you both. Oh, Hannah, did you want to come back in?
I was just going to say, I think you're absolutely right. It's what we can take into the schools, but I think there's also something about how do we give resources and tools to all of us? Because I think I can speak for myself as a parent. I feel that I'm sort of wading into an area that I don't always know how to have some of those conversations. The online world has changed, and some of the Gail Dines, who was part of the recent virtual safeguarding series, she did some stuff around pornography, and it was pretty hard hitting. And I know that in the audience there was a lot of conversation about, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? How are we going to, as parents, that sense of we feel that we too need some tools to be able to have some very difficult conversations. And I think this is the first part, just recognizing actually we do need to support one another, but we can't do nothing, we can't ignore it, because this is happening in our community, online and in real life. So
brilliant, thank you. And Matt, you've been very patient, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, I just needed to get in just to kind of just set out some of the work that's already being done, and I want to come back with, because some of what Hannah and Lynn have said about the difficult conversation that needs to happen, I want to come on to as well. So I just want to just say a little bit about some of the work that is already happening in schools. So the Healthy Relationships program that's already happening, the Empower program that's already happening. So I just kind of wanted to mention that, because there is a lot of work that's already happening with young people. So I just think it's helpful to say that. It just helps to put a little bit of context around that. So we've got the NSPCC is already in schools to encourage young people to understand consent and gender stereotypes. We've got Together for Childhood working with young people in schools to promote healthy relationships, both within formal and informal education settings. And then bystander training, we just need to mention, is free. So we should be able to get some information out about that for people, so that there is an opportunity for people to get onto bystander training to help. In terms of the difficult conversation, that probably is the next step for for all of us, especially for males like myself, and we do need people like myself in leadership positions to kind of step forward and to start leading the conversation. It is going to be very, very difficult for the city, for men in the city, because it's really great to hear Lynn's son, for a young person like Lynn's son to be in the right position for the conversation, but there are going to be lots of men that aren't in the right position for the conversation. So we need to now start taking the conversation out, because you know, it's very clear that that's where the conversation needs to be. It needs to be in the, you know, the conversation needs to be with men. ONS says that 2 out of 3 women under 35 have experienced sexual harassment. So we need to be talking to those men.
Great. Is that everything? Yeah, brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was stopping.
No, that's
that
fine.
point.
No, that's good. Okay. I mean, that whole conversation in terms of education and how we can work together as a whole community is going to be key. There's been a couple of questions adding on to the diversity question that we were asked at the beginning, in terms of the LGBT community and the disabled community as well, and how we will bring those groups into the commission and ensure that their voices are heard. And they're really good questions, and obviously when I suggest diversity, that's included in that. So but I've made a note of those specifics, and we will be ensuring that we engage directly with representation from those groups, even if we've already got them. But I know that we had, because that's part of my heart for this whole piece of work, so to speak, is to be as inclusive as possible. We will be looking specifically into those. Lynn, your hand's raised.
I did respond to that, one of those particular questions in the chat, but it's just to make everybody aware that Devon and Cornwall was successful in securing some funding to increase our independent domestic violence advocates, and specifically to enable us to recruit some LGBTQ, sorry, I'll refer to them as IDFAs because it's so much quicker. And so we've recently recruited one in Cornwall, and then Torbay will be recruiting one for the whole of Devon. And they will be co-located with our LGBT charity, the Intercom Trust. And that is to raise awareness of domestic abuse and sexual violence within the LGBT community, but also to improve the awareness of what the issues are that the LGBT community face within our domestic abuse and sexual violence services. Because we're really good at tackling domestic abuse and sexual violence, but if we don't understand the wider determinants, what actually affects people in those diverse communities, people with all the different protected characteristics are not going to be able to fully access the services that we deliver. So as part of the 16 days of action that we recently did, we did different webinars that focused on people from Black and minority communities. We had somebody from ARC, which focused on adults with learning disabilities and understanding the issues that they particularly face as well. So we recognise there are issues that there are different issues that affect different parts of our community, and we are starting that piece of work, but we know we've got an awful long way to go. But it's just to reassure people we do recognise it and we are trying to do something about it.
Brilliant, and I know it will also feature in the work of what the Commission does as well. There's been a few questions asking about the Commission or the Council to sign up to things, so the White Ribbon City campaign and that sort of thing. Absolutely, that will all form part of the Commission. I'm not currently in the position to be able to say yes to those because that's not my job. However, I've seen all of those, and I will be bringing that to the Commission. And if that's one of our recommendations, I know you'll say, well, why can't you just do it now? That might be the case, but it's not in my gift to suggest that this evening. However, if by the time the Commission reports we haven't done that, it may well be a recommendation of the committee. So thank you for raising that with me. I'm aware of that. Now, a few of the questions we've had both before and this evening have been about statistics. So actually, how safe is Plymouth, or how unsafe is Plymouth? And are there specific areas where there is more work having to be done already? Obviously, how safe we feel is down to an individual person, and we can't define that for them. You know, if somebody doesn't feel safe, we need to do something about that. But out of interest, what are we looking at in the city, and are there what are those statistics just in terms of the city as a whole? Matt, do you have those to hand in terms of some of the crime stats that we've got?
Yes, I do. So I only pause because it's a massive topic, and if not handled with care can be misleading. So the first thing I would point out, and it might sound really obvious, is that not everything gets reported. Some things typically get over-reported, and media, etc., can influence that, and some things under. And I alluded to that with the drink spiking. So there's always a note of caution around what figures tell us, because I'm always nervous about the things that go underreported and therefore what we don't know. So we're always trying to understand more. The figures I suppose that might be useful, if I go back to the question of is it a safe city and how safe is safe, there's no city in the world that I've ever heard of that has no crime in it. So it's really important, I suppose, when we're asking that question to think about what do we mean by is it safe? And generally, it can only be a comparison thing. It's all relative. It can be relative to the individual, which their life experience in any area, and it can be relative to us comparing ourselves against other areas. But unfortunately, there's nobody I know of who's ever worked out a place for it to be entirely safe, because that would mean there's no crime. So instead, what might be more helpful is to say we compare ourselves in terms of crime stats to what we call our most similar group, and I did make mention of this when I started speaking. So there are a number of cities, I won't rattle them all off the hand, but places like Cardiff, who are viewed as having a similar kind of makeup to Plymouth, and that's a useful way of me understanding are we safer or not. And in overall crime, we are statistically lower than the average of all of those similar cities, which is, I think, a really good news story. And it is reducing at the moment. So crime is down. It's a complicated world, so forgive me, I'm trying to simplify it. But if we compare ourselves to a year ago, that's not that helpful, because the world was a very strange place a year ago. Many people weren't out in public spaces. So if we talk about things like violence against women and girls, it may be that there were low crime rates simply because people weren't out and about. So instead, we're comparing ourselves to 2019, so before lockdowns. And I can tell you that crime is down around about 5%. And violence with injury is also down by about 5%. The good news stories, many of our outcomes, especially in the last 3 months, have all gone up more than that average. But the areas that give me concern, and I did mention them at the beginning because we've always said the importance of having honest and open, and if needs be difficult conversations, is around rape and sexual offending, and also violence without injury. So again, without getting too technical, it might be that someone's had a violent experience but they haven't actually picked up an injury. Those are the areas that I think we need to do more work on. They follow a UK pattern of going up and down. They're not massively out of kilter with that, but there is definitely more that we should be doing, and we're working very hard to do with some of the areas that have already been talked about today. So in particular, how you prevent some of those offences happening, and a lot of that around police work is trying to get us out of that continually responding to calls for service, but getting into areas where we can make people feel safer and actually be safer before any offences occur. So what I mean by that is things like you should see more officers out in what we call the evening and nighttime economy, so out at pubs and clubs. We're putting more out earlier in the evening to be that deterrent to crime rather than trying to respond to the people who need us later in the evening. We can do that too, but what we'd much rather do, as I said right at the beginning of me speaking to people, was stop those crimes happening. So there's a few stats in there. I can do more for you if it helps, Councillor, but I feel I might be blinding people with percentages.
No, I think that's helpful. Thank you. There was a couple of specific comments very early on in the evening about conviction rates for rape and domestic abuse as well. I don't know, Alison, if that's something you want to comment on. How do we ensure, and I mean, you know, that might well be outside of the scope of the Commission per se, because obviously we're not in charge of that, but how do we, what needs to be done to ensure that conviction rates for these crimes against women, these violent crimes against women, increase?
So just before I answer that, I want to highlight the Street Safe tool that the Home Office has developed on the back of Violence Against Women and Girls' national strategy. Literally, I hope somebody can put it in the chat bar or Google Street Safe tool. It'll come up on the Home Office. So this is for you to share, anybody on this webinar, with as many people as you can, to log where you don't feel safe in Plymouth. And in fact, it covers the whole of the country, but you can specifically use it for Plymouth. I want you to know that at the moment we've been actively promoting it, and Devon and Cornwall has some of the highest response rates on that. So please share that, let us know where you don't feel safe, and it asks you to say why as well. So that is a really helpful tool that goes beyond the reporting of crime and what we know through that route, and will help us really get a feel of what people are thinking in the city. Now, in terms of conviction rates, this is beyond my ability of responsibility, but I do chair, and I know somebody's comment about using the term chairman. I prefer the term chairman. Madam Chairman is my preference, but I am actually chairman of the local criminal justice board, which brings all of those partners together. I'm also the chairman of the Southwest Reducing Reoffending Partnership for the whole region, which has the Ministry of Justice on, and the Youth Justice Board, and a range of other partners as well. We're actually just in the process of prioritising our key things for the year ahead. But in terms of that conviction rate, there's a number of things, I think. I think firstly, the women who and the men who have come forward to report, we do know at the moment that because I've asked the police of this, obviously my job is to hold the Chief Constable to account for the efforts that the force does. One of the challenges is on the back of a lot of, particularly when it started with Jimmy Savile and subsequently, a lot of people come forward with historic reports of rape and sexual offences, which are really tricky to deal with, especially if the perpetrator has died. You can't take someone to court who's dead, but there's a number, about a third of those incidences that are a part of the data are historic reports. So they're really tricky, they take a lot of time, and there often is very hard to obtain evidence to take through to a court. So just to give people a bit of a flavour. The other issue is, and I mentioned the SARC, and I'd like sarchelp.co.uk to, again, somebody put in the comments, or that, that is where you go straight away for advice, whether you think you have been raped. And these are particularly for people who think they've been spiked, who just don't know and are not sure. You can go and get immediate forensic examination. So please, sarchelp.org.uk, because I think people need to realise there are services there, there is help there. Because that will help also clearly take it forward to secure a conviction as well. So I think there's some challenges about understanding the process of going through a criminal justice process. And the one thing I know, because they did Operation Bluestone in Avon and Somerset Police, the government funded it, and they did a trial to look at why the conviction rate for rape was so low. And one of the reasons, and this is absolutely gobsmacking, one of the reasons is that there is more of a focus on the victim's credibility than there is on the evidence in the case. And this is, this issue about the focus on the victim is a real challenge. And I know somebody else has mentioned about the phones, mobile phones being removed from victims. The Victims Commissioner particularly has been championing, trying to get the change in legislation that you will only have it removed for 24 hours and you're a priority to get it back. So it's not about taking it off you for 6 months like it may be, because it takes that amount of time to look at all the data on there. There are some real issues about why there's been such a victim focus. That's why I don't even like the term victim focus, because what does that mean? It actually means in the criminal justice system, you actually get looked at more than the perpetrator. So we've got some real challenges there in the criminal justice system. I will do my best to influence that through the Criminal Justice Board. But again, this commission might want to highlight something or identify something that I can utilise in that process as well.
Thank you, Alison. And actually, what you've just said, and also because some of the questions were about sentencing policy and the whole kind of, this whole legal framework, which, isn't within the gift of Plymouth City Council to change. However, I think we can be making recommendations that get fed back up the food chain through local MPs, through Alison, etc., to influence policy in that way. So although we might not see an instant result on those sorts of issues, what the Commission will be able to do is hear some of the questions and the examples that we've got locally and then feed them back up. And that's definitely something I would like us to be able to do. There's been a couple of comments. I'm hoping people can see when the links are shared. Claire Baker's asked, what was the tool Alison mentioned? It's www.police.uk/street safe. And I actually reported something today. I tested it because I was at Plymouth train station the other day and had to park up a level, and I found the detritus of somebody clearly taking drugs in the stair lobby, and the thought, I reported that because I thought, I got back at 10 o'clock in the morning, so it wasn't a problem. But if I'd returned back to my car from the last train from London or Exeter or wherever, I think I would have not enjoyed finding whoever was using the tin foil in the corner. So it's those sorts of things. And in answer to the question, why do we have to take responsibility for telling, well, local councils, but in this case, the police, where we feel unsafe? A lot of it is, somebody will feel unsafe in a place that somebody else doesn't, but that doesn't make it unsafe. So we can't know where other people feel unsafe. So the more information we have, the more we can do to ensure that people are, we can do something about it. Lynn, thanks for your hand.
Just going back to criminal justice outcomes, interestingly, South Australia are approaching things totally differently. So within cases that are reported in this country, the issue often comes down to consent and whether true consent was actually given. And that's where a case will often fall down. In Australia, they are using the approaches, how do you prove you had consent? So you're totally turning the tables on an allegation being made. And I've often thought that I wonder what it would look like if we actually changed our approach to it in this country, and we would actually have to go out and when an allegation is made, how can they prove that they had consent? Because it's always down to the person who's had to report it, the fact that they didn't, and it's a question as to whether they were believed or not that they didn't, and that's when it will often fall down. So can we actually turn it around, prove they had consent in order to have sex with another person? Then you'll realise just how difficult it is for that poor person who's had to go out and report it in the first place. And in relation to people can access the SARC under a self-referral basis, but also our independent sexual violence advisor service that goes on to support victims of rape and serious sexual assault. If they are concerned about reporting it to the police as well, and they want to consider their options, we provide an options meeting for those individuals so they can consider all the different aspects of it before they need to go out and report to the police. And also, if they've got concerns, they really don't want to report to the police, but they want the police to know about it, we have a mechanism by which we can report anonymous information to the police as well. So if we see a pattern of offending behaviour within a city or across the force area, we can share that information anonymously with the police as well. So if people are concerned about that, please come forward and we can help them with that.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've had a number of questions again before and this evening, specifically about taxis, buses, CCTV, street lights, all of those practical things that go towards making us feel safe. I have no doubt that is going to be something that crops up in the Commission and is potentially some of the practical recommendations that we make. What that exactly looks like yet remains to be seen, because obviously we've got to look at that as a group. But I'm just wondering if anybody's got any comments on any of those things. I'm obviously not looking for you to promise something this evening, because that's not necessarily within your gift, but are there things that we can be doing as a city to improve those things, and how quickly can we deliver some of those? I think, Matt, that might be a question for you, if possible.
Yeah, so I can come in. So taxis, the taxi licensing team have responded with the consultation that they're doing at the moment, which has a couple of strands in it that they are trying to improve. We've lost a number of taxi drivers over the last few months, and so they've responded during the consultation to try and do a number of things to try and get the number of taxi drivers up. So the consultation is out at the moment, and they're doing a number of things, which is removing so the consultation is looking to remove the number of the limit on the number of hackney carriages. They're removing the time limit, or the upper limit of 3 years on the time limit of coming back in, if a taxi driver is coming back in on when you have to take your tests and stuff. So they're doing a few things to try and bring the number of taxi drivers back into the system. So that will hopefully increase the number of taxi drivers, because we understand that the lack of taxi drivers at the moment is not good. So that's one thing. In terms of buses, we are working with the bus companies to try and get additional bus services on. So there is an additional service being put on at the moment. I think it's on at about 4 a.m. in the morning, so that's being put on. The Safer Streets programme, we got funding in Safer Streets programme 1, we got funding in Safer Streets 3, which we are rolling out at the moment. So we have a number of things being rolled out between now and March 22.
Matt, can I just ask you a supplementary on that while you're talking about what is Safer Streets 1 and what is Safer Streets 2 and what is Safer Streets 3?
So the Home Office has had a number of funding rounds from the beginning of last year in coordination with Alison's office. Local authorities were able to bid for funding. Plymouth was successful in Safer Streets 1, so we had money for Stonehouse, and then in Safer Streets 3 we got money again for, this time it was for the city centre, the Barbican, the Hoe, and we're rolling out a set of measures around CCTV, help points, street lights, some training. There's a number of measures that we're rolling out as Safer Streets 3, all aimed at violence against women and girls and just making Plymouth a safer place. So
how quickly will we see that? Because there's been a few questions about why hasn't stuff started already. Clearly the funding is coming into play. How quickly will that sort of those sorts of inputs be seen around our streets?
So it's all being spent between now and March. So there's a project manager in place, and all of that work is being delivered between now and March 31st. So there's lots of work being done. But in terms of the funding was only announced, I think it was something like the beginning of November, and then there's with delivering things like CCTV cameras and new lighting, there is a bit of a run into that. So you can't just throw up CCTV cameras. There is a bit of work to do that. So, but it will be happening between now and March 31st. So.
And so I suppose just to you and Alison, and I have seen your hand, Hannah, so I'll come back to you in a second. I presume, therefore, some of the recommendations of this commission from March onwards may well be what enables us then to bid for further funding, because we will have that evidence and those ideas and those asks that we can then make to the government to get funding. I clearly can't hold you to that, but I'm assuming that's the sort of thing then that the commission will be able to deliver on.
Yeah, I mean, with things like street lights, additional CCTVs, you can't put additional CCTV up without evidence that it's needed. So if people are using street safe as to say why particular streets aren't safe, then that's the evidence that will tell us that there's a need in certain places, and then we will use that evidence, and using the crime data that Matt Longman's got, using our antisocial behaviour data, using environmental visual audits and stuff, we'll then put all that evidence together, and using the work of the commission, we'll use all that evidence to decide what other work we'll do going forward.
Great, thank you. And Hannah.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, I think Safer Streets, there's some really good stuff happening, and Trevi's been part of that bid, which is great. But I think it's also important for us to not lose sight of the fact, and I know it was raised in the question and answer, that women are at risk in their own homes as well. Women and girls are at risk of violence and harm and abuse within the home, and I think that we must make sure we don't lose sight of that. We saw incidents of domestic homicide nationally rise during the lockdown. Who knows what next year will bring, but I think it's just really important to remember that lockdown was a perpetrator's dream, and we potentially, if we do have any restrictions further around the corner, we've just got to think about, well, how do we bring a focus back on keeping women and girls safe when they're in the home, because that sadly is not a safe place for many women.
And having been to one of your events to commemorate those women, it's incredibly moving. Just to reassure people, we've got these two really large pillars. In one sense, you've got the domestic violence and abuse and the education that needs to go on, and all the education of boys and men and attitude change. I suppose it's three main pillars, but then all the practical steps as well. And I just want to reassure people that all of those are in the mix and will be the sorts of focus of this commission. And you know, like I said at the beginning, there are points that people have made this evening that unfortunately we won't have time to touch on, that, you know, I'm like a sponge. I'm literally taking it all in and looking at how we can ensure that all these things can come through. Now, I'm just conscious of time. We're going to finish at 8 o'clock, and I want to allow each of the speakers just an opportunity to say anything finally. I looked through some of the questions at the beginning of the evening. There's been a couple of mentions of the outskirts of Plymouth. Again, Matt, this could be something for you to comment on, and potentially Matt Garrett, potentially Matt Longman as well. Is there anything more that we can be doing to make the outskirts of the city safer? You've obviously mentioned, Matt Garrett, about additional CCTV in the city centre and Stonehouse and the Hoe, which are obviously really important. But, you know, if you live in Southway or Whitley or Tamerton Folliot or somewhere like that, what more can we do to ensure that women in those further flung parts of the city feel safe as well?
That's a really good question. So we do concentrate on the areas that have the highest crime rates and the highest rates of antisocial behaviour. That isn't to say we're not reviewing all areas of the city. In terms of, we mentioned before, things like taxis and the bus. So we are working with the bus companies to ensure that our kind of connectivity with those areas is improved. So working with the bus companies to make sure that their connectivity is as good as it can be with those areas. In terms of street lighting, we do try and review to make sure that the streets are kind of lit appropriately, and kind of review those. In terms of other stuff, it's really difficult, and I suppose we just have to go based on what evidence we get from the general public, really, and how they're feeling. And that's why doing some of this work at the moment, and using the commission to do more listening now to try and hear what people are telling us and how they're feeling. And if we're getting real messages from the outskirts, then we'll have to see what else we can do to improve things.
Brilliant, thank you. Matt Longman, is there anything to add from your perspective?
Well, I think the best thing that helps me is that when we're investing in neighbourhood policing, and the point of that is that local officers, whether they be PCSOs or neighbourhood beat officers, are out and about knowing their communities, and we do spread that across the city. So you're right, there is often, whoever raised the question, there is often talk about the nighttime economy, the city centre, the Hoe, and we get the challenges of all those areas. But that's not to say we haven't got our eye everywhere else, and I'm always looking to resource across the city, because the best thing I can have is that kind of intelligence source, if you like, of my staff knowing a community and being able to feed back to me. What's it feel like to live here, to work here, to jog here, to take my kids out here, whatever it might be? That's how we understand how we truly need to police it, and it all feeds back into machine. Because there are then a lot of resources in the city that are more flexible. So if I know there's a particular problem this week in Whitley, I can put more resources out there. But it all comes from the eyes and ears of neighbourhood policing, and that's where we put more resources recently. So I think in summary, I would always urge people to get to know the local resources. If this commission can help me understand ways of firming up those relationships even more, but be rest assured it's not just about city centre and the high footfall areas, it is spread across the city.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had an interesting question about, can we learn from any work in other cities and communities? Are there any outstanding examples of how these communities have improved safety and reassurance that Plymouth can learn from? We've got people who aren't from Plymouth that are going to be sitting on the commission. My policy background means that I've done just this sort of thing. I love hearing about projects that are already happening. It gets me really excited, because actually there's no point in reinventing the wheel. If somebody's already doing something that works and we can prove it's working and it would relate well to Plymouth, then that's fabulous. So I think there's a plea from me, and I will talk more about feeding further information into the commission at the end, but anything like that where there are, you know, exemplars of good practice going on elsewhere, please feel free to share that, whether that's because your mother-in-law lives somewhere and she's mentioned something, or your daughter's at university somewhere, or your son's come across something in another part of the country. You know, no piece of information sent to me is going to be wasted, so please feel free to send as much as you can. Alison, I've seen your hand.
I was just going to share that we've actually got some examples close to home as well. So been working very closely with the city of Exeter, because only a year ago, last August, there was the murder of Lorraine Cox. Absolutely disgusting tragedy that happened to her, and it never got the national attention that Sarah Everard did. And it was really, really shocking. And we've been working with the family to actually, their family has brought the politicians, the agencies, the university together to actually look at and tackle and address some of the safe issues in the city. So I just wonder if there's an opportunity for some people who've suffered with lived experience who might be able to help us, but there's also some really great learning just from Exeter up the road. But I'm sure that we'll be able to reach out across to other police force areas if you wanted me to explore that a bit further afield.
I think there's a resounding yes from me on that. And I think if anybody here has specific groups that they think we should be taking evidence from, I can't promise that we'll have enough time in the amount of time we've got to do that in. But, you know, again, our list is not exhaustive. It's only as good as the knowledge we've already got. So if you know of anything, that's going to be really helpful. I know that the night buses have been mentioned, and I just want to say there's a couple of questions here. What about women getting off the night buses that still have a walk home? How do we ensure the safety of women after they leave the night bus? That sort of question was exactly what I raised in licensing when we were told about this last week. These buses will stop at all of their normal stops. So providing somebody lives as close to a bus stop as possible, they'll be able to get off there. There's going to be CCTV and doormen who are watching who gets on and off the buses. So in terms of safety on those buses, they're going to be top, you know, as good as they can be. I realise that isn't going to protect everybody on every single step back to their home, but hopefully people will be travelling in groups, or they'll be, you know, maybe, you know, if it's particularly worried, the bus drivers will be stopping as close to people's homes as they possibly can. I realise I probably just committed them to something there, that but I know that they were definitely going to be tackling all the bus stops along the way. And then the people have asked about communication plan to go forward. So I'll touch on that in my wrapping up at the end. I think I'm going to stop asking questions there. I'm sure there's going to be people who are unhappy that I haven't covered everything, but like we said, we will look at getting answers to all of you and to all of those questions and sharing those publicly. The whole idea is that this is a public forum, so we're wanting people to have access to this afterwards. Right, I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes or a minute or so just to say anything that they want to say at the end, and then I've just got a few words to finish, and I will tell you what's next as I wrap up. So I'll go around my screen. Matt, Garrett, if you want to go first.
So I think all I would really say is, from everything we've heard, the city is doing a lot of good work into the city. There's lots of great work being done, isn't there? We've heard lots about it tonight, about what's being done. I think there is obviously lots more work to be done around behaviour and culture change. So there's lots, you know, there's lots of reframing to do around the prevention of male violence. And I'm just really interested about what we can do as a city around the next steps around the men and boys work, and how there's just something for me about what I can do in that space. It won't just be me. what I can do in that space to kind of support the leadership and I suppose just probably asking certainly some of my colleagues on the panel, but also some of the people that are on just on this call in general around the support I'll need to do that work. So that's probably where I'll leave it around that.
Okay, thank you. Alison.
So a lot of the effort in the space that my office has been involved in, and you've heard quite a bit of it tonight, is funding a lot of these things that are being talked about, or facilitating the funding of it. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things. So firstly, there hasn't been a big focus on perpetrators of domestic abuse in particular. It's only been recent, and that's with some government funding of £500,000. My job is to work out how we're going to sustain that beyond it when it runs out in March. So I think there's something around that perpetrator element that this commission might want to explore to ensure that we've got enough there, and how that is going to be sustained, because it's the only and the first time really that there's been a big focus on abusers that we've been able to do. So I think that's quite a key one. The Safer Street tool, the Street Safe tool, really want to promote that as part of this commission. I would love to see the voices of Devon and Cornwall, and particularly Plymouth, as you've got the commission, to show the value of it, that it is, people can report where they don't feel safe. It's nothing to do with reporting it to the police. It's reporting on a police website, but it is, you can just say why you don't feel safe, and that understanding is what will help us put the right interventions in place. And as you heard already tonight, there's a number of interventions. The Safer Streets funding come from government. There's also, I'm putting some funding into Torbay to do similar things around safer streets, because they haven't had access to that government money. The other couple of things to mention is, obviously, I'm very much been focused on dealing with the crime at the moment, and we're trying to move into prevention. But the crime issue at the moment, we have just set up a victim support contract, which is the largest 10-year contract outside of the Mayor's office in London, because I'm absolutely serious about creating sustainable resources for victims of crime. So that's quite key. And Operation No Waiting. Let's be really clear, if you are a victim of a serious offence, there may be a 6-month wait to access support, and we're trying to clear that backlog. So that implemented a range of funding to try and clear the backlog so there isn't a wait. These are all the things that affect the criminal justice process as to whether or not people are feeling ready to take it forward. So I'd really like to just highlight that. And finally, just to add about the courts and the lack of prosecutions, or the concern of that. Again, the courts backlog that's happened during the pandemic will have exacerbated that problem. And when you've been a victim of rape or a serious offence, it's particularly, you are not going to want to wait 1 year to 2 years to get that through a court, because you are going to want to get on with your life. And this is our real challenge of how you make justice swift. And I wonder if there's an opportunity to invite the court in Plymouth to understand what the backlog is and how long those offences take. And I'm just again wondering if the commission, the visibility of it is part of the challenge. And just finally, just to say, I'm sorry I'm going on, finally, just to say, I think it'd be really helpful, because our biggest issue is there are lots of things available and lots of things in place that most people don't know about. So how could we help people easily understand what they might need should something happen to them? So that to me is a critical one, because I'm absolutely, that the shame of being a victim of a serious offence is so great, and data protection and personal anonymity is so important, and confidentiality, that we can't publicly even advertise where the sexual assault referral centre is. If we've got that much shame of being a victim of these horrific things, how are we ever going to have an open conversation about it? So I'll just leave it there.
No, thank you, Alison. And those are all really, really good points, and I'm sure you'll feed them directly in as well. So Lynn and Hannah, I don't know if you want to sum up separately or together.
I'll let Hannah go, because I did the introduction.
Okay.
Over to you, Hannah.
Not that you were a double act in any way, shape or form. I'm just aware that it is 8 o'clock. And
That's fine. I suppose what is really highlighted tonight is the complexity of the issues. And I think that I have been sort of more recently, there's been a more sort of public interest around issues about violence against women and girls. And I think people want sort of easy solutions or easy answers. And I think just the range of things that we've talked about tonight show how complex it is. And I have to be honest, sometimes working in this sector, it can feel quite heavy and quite tricky and quite hard to sort of navigate our way through. But I suppose I want to offer some assurances that there are some phenomenal people in this city that are working incredibly hard, and that's people on the front line as well, people working in sort of in my service, in Lynn's services, in the local authority, the police. There are so many people that are working incredibly hard. So I want people to, I guess, take a bit of comfort how hard people are working here in the city in a very tricky piece of sort of, is a difficult thing to try and sort of get some solutions around. And then the last thing, just to say that we do have the installation, which was part of the DASV partnership with the Shoes to commemorate and honour women that were murdered last year. It's at the Guildhall until Friday, so I would encourage people to go and see it, have a look, and just, yeah, sort of come and honour women that died last year. And thank you for inviting us to be part of it.
No, thank you very much. And finally, Matt Longman, is there anything you want to just sum up with?
So thank you to everybody who's been part of this evening. I think it's really helpful to take us forward. I suppose I've been listening with interest, and there's a bit of a head that gets involved in some of the statistics and some of the very transactional things we talk about. And then there's the kind of a parent of a teenage daughter that sees the world in a different light. And I think both of them are okay in this space. So if I go to the transactional bit, some of the things we talked about tonight, like CCTV, the Street Safe app, I can tell people since the 1st of September has done 223 referrals in Plymouth alone, which is great. And I just want people to know that does come to me. It does go into Safer Plymouth. We work all together across the city to put resources in response to that. So I don't want people to think those things kind of just go down a black hole, as it were. The CCTV that's expanding all the time, and Matt's talked about, is on a direct radio channel to my officers, and we can respond very quickly. So all those things will help us. And in many ways, they help us. I've also seen as manager, I was going to mention that through intelligence, we manage some specific offenders. So where I know there are high-risk offenders in the city, we've got plans behind them like I've never actually seen in my career in policing. So that's all really good news, and it helps, I think. There's a step forward. There's more to do that will help us catch the right people and keep people safe. But I think there's a bigger bit than that, and this is kind of the heart's bit. I think if we're talking in those spaces, yes, all those processes will become more effective. But I think more than that, I think collectively and throughout the partnerships, it's a statement, it's a shift in stance in saying that this is not okay and things need to change, and we're kind of putting our marker down that say that things will. So the biggest thing I would ask from the Commission, if you can, is just to understand how we get people to have enough trust to engage in all those things we've just talked about, to engage in the police, to engage in some of the apps mentioned, and to engage in this Commission, to help us understand how that's making a difference to them, and that the things we think are the right things to do actually are making a difference.
Brilliant, thank you. And just again, there's been a few comments over the questions over the course of the evening in terms of some really good ideas, and put the information about domestic abuse support and victim support on the back of council tax bills. Someone really early on mentioned, could we do a similar thing to street pastors? That's definitely worth looking at. How do we use Plymouth Argyle and their community trust to work on this? All of those things, even if we haven't answered your question directly this evening, they're all captured, and I promise you I'm the biggest fan of using other people's ideas and delivering them for them. You know, that's ultimately what my job is. So I don't need to come up with them myself. I'm more than happy to take your ideas. There's also been a question about how we'll communicate with more vulnerable groups, so particularly women who've been victims. That's where Hannah and Lynn are key to this, because they have those links into those communities, and the Women's Centre, the Sunflower Centre in town will be key. We will ensure that they are engaged with, and I know that they'll push that out to all their users. Similarly, like I said before, with disabled communities and those groups as well, that will be really important. Someone also raised a question about non-online ways to get involved, and actually that's a really good point. The council has really good comms that mean we can get things into the paper, we can get things into the Herald, we can get things into the Plymouth Chronicle, we can invite, people can write us a letter if necessary. So we'll make sure that there's a mailbox that is allocated to the Commission as well, so that if someone doesn't have access to email or to the internet easily, they can still contribute. And I would just urge anybody who's on here who knows someone in that situation to talk about it and make sure they know that this is open to them. We can communicate, but we still need people to read what we're pushing out. So we will publish a video of the event and the presentations. Well, there weren't any presentations, but we'll publish a video of the event in the coming days, and also the list of questions and answers that we weren't able to cover. You'll also get a thank you email with all of that information. At the very end of this event, there's going to be some slides outlining some of the support we've talked about, whether that's for you this evening, because this has touched on some things that you've experienced yourself, or because you're keen to know how to direct other people. You won't get it for long enough if you're clever enough to screenshot it this evening, but if not, it will get sent out in that thank you email. So by tomorrow morning, you should have access to that. And then what's next for the Commission? The makeup of who the Commission will be announced in the next few days. We've had to go, we've gone nationwide on this, but we have to respect that people need to get back to us. So please just give us a bit of time on that. But my aim is to have that out before Christmas. So hopefully by the end of this week, so that we've got our meeting scheduled for the new year. And we're going to be meeting every 2 to 3 weeks, or as often as necessary. Again, I'm very conscious that this is a big piece of work, and we will be needing to engage with people as quickly as possible. There'll be another evidence session, but also opportunity aplenty for you to feed in written evidence. So I would just urge you, thank you for those who've contributed tonight, but if you have any questions or ideas or comments, there's going to be an online survey and a portal where you can submit your own experiences and comments in due course. Again, that's just being pulled together at the moment. However, in the meantime, I'm really keen off the back of tonight that if you have anything you want to sort of get down on virtual paper, so to speak, beforehand, please feel free to email me directly, and I will be collating all of those things and feeding them in. My email address is rebecca.smith@plymouth.gov.uk. Hopefully my name has been on the screen this evening, so you know the spelling. It's all pretty basic. Rebecca.smith@plymouth.gov.uk. And we are keen to take evidence from a wide range of groups. And like I've said, tell us who you think we should be speaking to, send us your own information. And as I said at the beginning, we will then be getting specific organisations to lead on the delivery. So not all of this is down to the council, not all of this is down to the police, some of it is down to different parts of the community, and that will be what we're doing once we're ready with the report. It will be finalised for the end of March, and the recommendations will get set out and followed through. You can bet your bottom dollar that I'll be making sure those recommendations get followed. But in the meantime, as Matt has said, we will see progress soon on some of the practical things, the night buses, the CCTV, the street lights, etc. And just to finally mention, don't forget that street safe tool. As I say to my residents who complain about antisocial behaviour or crime, if it's not reported, the police are not psychic, so they need to know how we're feeling. Hence why I reported the roll of tinfoil I found at the station the other day, because actually it made me realise I wouldn't have felt safe at even 9 o'clock at night walking through that stairwell. Thank you so much for attending. I'm really privileged that so many people feel really privileged that so many people have turned up. This is just the beginning. We are working at pace, and I'm really keen to hear from you over the next few months. And a big thank you to the panel for giving up their time, and thank you for all that you do professionally and in your own time to support these vulnerable communities. And ultimately, things, as Matt said, things do need to change, and I know you are already working to change things, and it's, I feel privileged to be part of this and to be working with you to hopefully make our city feel safer and make women and girls within it much, much safer as well. So thank you very much, and as we continue on this work, may I wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas, and we will be in touch with you and keep you updated as things progress. So thank you very, very much for attending.
Thank you.